On a cold, rainy evening in a bustling American city, life moved quickly, and no one noticed the small figure huddled beside a dumpster. The little girl, no older than 8, sat silently with rain soaking through her thin clothes, clutching a worn-out teddy bear as if it were her last source of comfort. People hurried past, umbrellas up, eyes down, too busy to see the child hidden in the shadows of tall buildings and glowing storefronts. To the world, she was invisible, just another forgotten soul on the streets. But within her, a spark remained. She wasn't always like this. Not long ago, she had a name full of warmth and love. They used to call her Princess Ella. She had once lived a life filled with bedtime stories, warm meals, and laughter that echoed through the halls of her home. But something happened, something that made her run. Maybe it was fear, maybe confusion, or maybe she was taken and then escaped. Either way, she ended up alone. The world, distracted and noisy, didn't stop for missing girls, especially those who stopped asking to be found. Yet as she sat there, cold and shivering, there was something in her eyes that hadn't been broken. Something brave. A flicker of hope. She still believed in fairy tales, in kindness, and maybe, just maybe, that someone might still see her. Even when the world had forgotten her name, she remembered who she was deep down. She was Princess Ella. And though her crown was gone and her castle lost, she still carried her royal heart in silence, waiting for someone, anyone, to remind her that she was not invisible. That she mattered. That even the smallest spark can survive the darkest storm. Joseph was used to being unnoticed. Every night, he cleaned the library floors, mopped up muddy footprints, and put back books left behind. He moved slowly, favoring one leg from an old injury, and kept mostly to himself. But on this quiet, rainy night, something outside the fogged window caught his attention, a small, shivering figure huddled under a street lamp across the alley. It was the same little girl he had seen a few times before, sitting alone, silent, as if waiting for a world that had long passed her by. Her fragile frame shook in the cold, rain dripping from her tangled hair. Joseph stared for a long moment, his heart aching. He didn't know her name or where she came from, but something in the way she held that ragged teddy bear, like it was the last piece of a life she couldn't return to, moved him deeply. Quietly, he went to the break room and gathered what little he had, a peanut butter sandwich from his lunch bag and a spare blanket from the lost and found box. He stepped into the rain and gently approached her, crouching down so he wouldn't scare her. "Don't be afraid," he said softly, holding out the food. "No one should sleep in the rain." She didn't answer, just looked at him with wide, cautious eyes before slowly reaching for the sandwich. Her hands trembled as she held it, as if it were a rare treasure. Joseph didn't press her, didn't ask questions. He just offered a quiet smile and added, "Come back if you're cold again." Then he turned and walked away. To him, it was a small kindness. To her, it felt like the world finally noticed she was still there. In the days that followed their first meeting, Ella came back, quietly, cautiously, always when the library was nearly empty. Joseph would leave a small plate of food near the back room and make sure a stack of children's books was waiting beside it. She never said much, but her eyes sparkled when she opened a new story. She read for hours, losing herself in pages filled with castles, dragons, and brave girls who always found their way home. Joseph never pried. He simply let her be. He noticed how she handled books with care, how she smiled at happy endings, how she seemed to belong in a world far more magical than the streets she'd wandered. Then one afternoon, as Joseph was crouched beside a crooked shelf, trying to hammer it back in place, he heard her soft voice behind him. "I used to be a princess." He paused, glancing over his shoulder, unsure if she was speaking from imagination or memory. "I believe you," he said with a kind smile, thinking maybe it was just another fairy tale in her head. But she walked slowly over to the bulletin board where local notices and event flyers were pinned. With one small finger, she pointed to a faded, weathered paper nearly hidden beneath others. Joseph stood up and looked closer. It was a missing child poster. Blonde hair. Big eyes. A name, Ella Morgan. Missing for over a year. Taken during a thunderstorm outside her family's estate. "That's me," she said quietly. Joseph's breath caught. The resemblance was undeniable. His heart pounded as he looked between the poster and the fragile girl in front of him. Could it really be her, the lost daughter of a family who had searched the nation? Everything in his world shifted in that moment. That night, Joseph sat alone in the quiet library, the hum of fluorescent lights echoing louder than ever. He stared at the missing child flyer now pinned at the center of the board, his hands trembling. Every part of him wanted to protect Ella, to keep her close, where she felt safe. But deep down, he knew the truth: she didn't belong to the shadows or the silence. She belonged home. With a family that had never stopped searching. Sleep never came. At sunrise, with a heavy heart, Joseph picked up the phone and dialed the number on the poster. His voice shook as he explained. I found her." When the police arrived, Ella shrank behind a bookcase, panic in her eyes. Joseph called her gently, crouching low. She ran into his arms, clutching his shirt like it was the only solid thing in her world. "Please don't send me away," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. He held her tightly, his own eyes glassy. "Sweetheart," he said softly, cupping her cheeks, "real princesses aren't meant to hide in alleys. You deserve more than this." He reached into his coat pocket and pressed the teddy bear into her hands, the same one he'd sewn a button-eye back onto just days before. She sobbed as the officers gently took her hand. She never looked away from Joseph, eyes pleading, heartbroken. And as the door closed behind her, Joseph stood frozen, staring into the empty room where she used to read fairy tales. He wiped a tear from his cheek, whispering to the silence, "Be brave, Princess Ella." He didn't know if she'd understand yet. But sometimes love meant letting go, and praying it would lead them home. 6 months had passed, and life at the library slowly returned to normal. Joseph still mopped the same floors, dusted the same shelves, and fixed the same creaky chairs, but something had changed. The corner where Ella used to sit felt empty, quiet in a way that stung. He missed her laughter, her questions, the way her eyes lit up when a story took her somewhere magical. The building was the same, but the warmth she brought had gone with her. Then one sunny afternoon, as golden light spilled across the polished floors, a sleek black car pulled up outside. Joseph barely noticed it until the door opened, and there she was. Ella. Her blonde hair brushed her shoulders, and her smile was as bright as ever. She wore a sky-blue coat, the color of hope, and in her hands, she still held the teddy bear. Before he could speak, she ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. "I missed you," she whispered, burying her face in his chest. Joseph knelt, too overcome to speak, his heart full and aching all at once. Behind her stood her parents, grateful, tearful. Her father stepped forward and said, "She told us what you did. You didn't just help her survive, you helped her believe again. You saved our princess." Joseph's eyes welled with tears. In all his years, no one had ever said words like that to him. He had always been the man in the background. Invisible. Ella reached into her coat pocket and placed something in his hand, a delicate golden bracelet with a small charm shaped like a crown. "For my real hero," she said softly. "You'll always be my family." And in that moment, surrounded by sunlight, Joseph didn't feel like a janitor. He felt like a king. In a world that often overlooks the quiet and the forgotten, a janitor with a gentle heart and a little girl who had lost everything found each other in the unlikeliest place. The Missing Princess isn't just a story about a child returning home, it's about how love, kindness, and selfless acts can reach beyond bloodlines, beyond titles, and beyond circumstance. Joseph didn't wear a cape, and Ella had no crown, yet their bond was forged in something stronger than fairy tales: humanity. He gave her warmth when she was cold, safety when she was scared, and dignity when the world turned away. And in return, she gave him what he didn't even know he had lost: a sense of purpose, of being seen, of being needed. Their story reminds us that real heroes are often unseen, and true royalty lives in the way we treat others. Sometimes, all it takes is a single act of compassion to rewrite someone's destiny. Because love isn't about where you come from, it's about who shows up when it matters most.